Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here, and I'm excited to be here. It's the first time I've traveled for a conference since COVID. I'm from California, so it's a little bit early for me, and my voice, I woke up this morning a little croaky and everything, so I hope I make it through it okay. But bear with me if not. Thank you. And how do I change? Use this one. Okay. Okay, so we're going to talk about handling patient data. So I'll start a little bit about me. I've been in medical device software for over 20 years now. I have a degree in computer engineering, but then I went and I started working at Cardiac Science back in 2001. And that got me my introduction to medical device. And since then, I worked at contract manufacturer for IVD instruments and really got a really good spread of devices behind me. So I'm happy to promote this talk today, and hopefully you'll get something out of it. And please feel free to ask questions. I may or may not be able to answer them. Okay, so a little bit about Promenade software. We do software development for medical devices. Everything we do is medical device or related. Sometimes they're exempt, usually they're class 2, class 3, de novo. We kind of do the gambit. SAMD, we do firmware, we do mobile, we have a cloud offering. So we're in this space, the digital space for medical devices. We also do verification and regulatory consulting. So that's a growing area of our business because the cybersecurity aspect of the submissions is quite daunting for a lot of our clients. So we help them through that. We have over 20 software engineers. We're located here in the US. We do not use India. We do not offshore. Almost everybody's in California. We are remote now, so we started hiring remote engineers. We have one engineer in Indiana. So that's just kind of the way things are going now. Just a sampling of our clients. We run the gamut. We've got large clients, small clients, startup. Everybody has areas that they're experts in and areas that they need help in. There's big companies and small companies. And we provide our little niche of software for medical devices, that gambit. Okay, so let's talk about handling patient data and the governance of it. So first of all, this is kind of an FDA conference, and the FDA doesn't deal with privacy. That's not their thing. So just kind of get that out of the question. But there's so much overlap technically. I put it in here. So in the US, we have HIPAA. You're all familiar with that. It's some people sometimes get confused. It's not governed by the FDA. It's governed by the Health and Human Services Department. Okay. Sorry. But the FDA cybersecurity covers handling of data, medical device data, the transfer of data, the storage of data. So it's kind of an umbrella of how to handle data. It follows the NIST cybersecurity standards. So everything kind of folds into that. How you handle patient data technically is like how you handle your device's configuration data or any sensitive data on the device. Okay, so in the US, you have HIPAA. In the EU, and this is also an area that our customers ask a lot on, is the GDPR. Now, we know the GDPR is broad, nothing specific for health. Well, health information is covered by the GDPR, but it wasn't built for that, right? It's just privacy in general. Unlike in the US, there is no governance of your privacy of information. There's state level, like California has the CCPA, which covers privacy. But nationally, there's your data is a free-for-all, except for HIPAA data, health data, which needs to be preserved and respected. So it includes HIPAA includes what we call the privacy rule, the security rule, and the breach notification rule. And from my background in computer engineering and what we do, I will be talking mostly about the security rule. Okay, there's a lot of processes involved in HIPAA. I'll touch on those. And just to be clear, I am not a lawyer. I do not provide legal advice, and you cannot take any of what I have here as legal advice. I'm not specifically an expert in privacy law, but with 20 years of experience, we've been audited by HIPAA experts. We've gone through, of course, numerous submissions to the FDA, all of that. I think I can provide a little bit of information, hopefully. Okay. So in the EU, you have the GDPR, and of course, you have the MDR and the IVDR. I think there is some talk about that later on for submission in the EU. And the MDCG, which is Medical Device Coordination Group, Cooperation Group, something like that. They have a guidance on cybersecurity. So you really see there's parallels there, at least in health data, HIPAA, GDPR. All right, so what is the health data we're trying to protect? HIPAA covers anything from the individual's past, present, or future health information, provisioning of health information, payment of health information. All of that is covered under HIPAA, okay? That's the privacy rule. The security rule, like I mentioned, going to be a little bit more getting involved with that, is how you do it, how you implement it digitally, digital security. Protected health information, PHI, the security rule is for what's called ePHI, electronic protected health information. Okay, so when you're dealing with software for medical devices, as we do, that's what we're dealing with, the electronic transfer of information, storage of information, access control, all the things that we need to provide in order to secure the data. So the technical safeguards, access control, audit controls, we need to log everything that's going on. We need to be able to pull up those logs and see who did what. We need to have all the integrity controls so we know that the data from where it starts to where it's stored to how it's used maintains its integrity, and transmission security. Okay, so HIPAA has no restriction on de-identified data. And that's great. We get a lot of clients who like to be creative with that. So they want to sort of subvert that into, well, we're not providing an identifier, the user can put in whatever they want, but ultimately it will identify a patient. So that is an identifier. If you are completely anonymizing the data, then you're de-identified and you can use it to your heart's content under HIPAA. Okay. So what are some of the identifiers? This is an area that our clients often have some confusion about. It's not just your name and your address, as we kind of all expect. You can have an EKG be an identifier because that signal is unique for you. A retinal scan, same thing. You could have, of course, your medical record number is an identifier under HIPAA. Anything that can trace your data to you is an identifier. Okay, so no getting around it, just support the HIPAA requirements, the security of the data. All right, let's go to the GDPR. If your company's based in the EU or UK, that whole thing sort of made things a little bit different. Or you process personal health information or personal data, I should say, for people in the EU, you need to follow the GDPR. Okay. So it's applicable in those two situations. The key principles of the GDPR. You need to be transparent. We will get a little bit more into the rights of patients or rights of individuals, I should say. I tend to use patients because that's our area, right? But the GDPR covers your data, right? And that's why, if you think about it, why did it come into being? It's because our data is abused and collected, and we have no control of it. And sometimes out on the internet, wrong data can be put out there, and how do you control that? So this was put in to protect people's privacy. So what does it require? It requires that you have to be transparent about how you're using a patient's data. You have to limit the purpose of that data. What you collect has to be within the purpose you declare, and only collect the data that you have declared necessary for that. That's a data minimization. Ensure data accuracy. Makes sense. The storage limitation, don't keep it around forever. Have a policy of getting rid of personal data. Integrity and confidentiality, that's where we get more involved because we need to protect the data, the confidentiality. And accountability. Who's accountable? You or whoever is managing the data, the business associates, like we often are, is accountable for protecting that data. Okay, so what's different between the GDPR and HIPAA? It is forbidden to share your data, health and genetic data, unless you get explicit consent. Okay. However, if it's in the patient's vital interests, like a medical emergency, then your records can be shared amongst the physicians. If a specialist sees you, data again can be shared within the medical community servicing you. Public interest. This one's a little bit vague. So, for instance, COVID, the data is collected for who had COVID and where. Okay. To ensure high quality standards and safeguards of medicinal products or medical devices. So if you're doing research, can you use the data? Again, I'm not a lawyer, but get consent. Okay, you don't have a free-for-all with data that's de-identified. You cannot use their data without following the regulations. So patient rights. And again, I'm talking about patients, but it's people's rights, individual rights under GDPR. They can object to you processing their data. They have the right to have you change the data if it's wrong, if you have incomplete data set or it's just wrong. Now, often this is more for general data, right? If something was published about you that's wrong as an individual, you want to get it fixed. It's in the internet, how do you get it corrected? In the US, you can't. But in the EU, you actually can, which is, I think, very nice. What's the one that is troublesome in our community is the right to erasure. Not because it's hard per se, conceptually, to remove a patient from any data that you're storing. But when you're dealing with data, it's replicated. You have backups. It's in different servers. You have a lot of copies of that data. So the right to erasure, the right to be forgotten is kind of the term that's used, is what's troublesome. It's like, well, what do we have to do about the data? Well, luckily, according to I don't know how to pronounce it because it's in French, so I'll just say CNIL, which is the French Data Protection Authority. They confirm that you don't need to delete backup data. But if you consider it, if that backup is used, you're going to have to make sure that you keep that deletion accurate. There's different ways you can handle it. So when we first were thinking about how to solve this problem, what we did was say, okay, we store all data encrypted, and we will basically throw away the key. We'll keep the key separate, throw away the key, and so I don't have to worry about the backups, because even if I bring it back, nobody can decrypt it. So that was our solution. Other solutions I've seen out there are kind of to isolate the data by patient, so you can get rid of it in backups, that sort of thing. But things are always a little bit harder to implement than they sound when you're talking about some of these technical problems. Individuals have the right to be informed, transparency, the purpose of the processing of the data, and there are exemptions. For instance, a blind trial, that sort of thing. All right, so here's a map. The dark blue is, of course, the EU, so you're safe there in transferring data. This is about data transfer. The purple, where you see yes, is not. As I said, we don't have any good privacy controls. And so the EU, in order to handle that, has made an agreement with the US. To throw this up here, the US does not ensure adequate level of protection for EU data in general. But to handle that, there's what's been implemented is what's called the Privacy Shield. Privacy Shield is an agreement between the US and the EU that allows companies to apply and to prove that they are adequately protecting the data. Okay, so what does it mean to transfer data? That's another misconception. That doesn't mean you move it from one server to another. That means if somebody's looking at the data, say you have a development team in India, and they can actually see the data, that is transferring the data, even though it's not, the storage of the data is not being moved. The visualization of it, the data itself is being transferred. So it applies here. Okay. Okay, so how do you actually secure it? And this is where it all parallels with the FDA and the cybersecurity in general. How do you secure data in general, not just patient data? Strong authentication, so strong passwords, multi-factor authentication for privileged accounts, for example. If you can see all the data, you need to be able to strongly authenticate that you're allowed to. Okay. So you assign roles, incorporating the principle of least privilege, which means as in your role, you only see what you need to see. As your role expands, maybe you're an administrator, you can maybe see more data, but then you have to have tighter authentication to go with it. Keeping audit records, logs, who did what to what data. Be able to bring that up, be able to follow it, manage it. Ensure the data security. So one of the tenets is data at rest needs to be encrypted and data in transport needs to be encrypted. So what does that mean? If you have the data collected, and this is very popular now, we do a lot of mobile device work that's talking maybe to a sensor or an analyzer. It's collecting the data. Even though it's kind of temporal on the mobile, because it might go up to the cloud, it needs to be encrypted on the device. Okay, so wherever the data is sitting, it needs to be encrypted. You need to manage those keys well. So it doesn't really help to encrypt data if the keys are readily available, right? In transit, use state-of-the-art technology, TLS, secure BLE, we'll get into that a little bit later. It's an area that is often kind of weak, we see. Protect against data leaks. So what does that mean? You've seen all the, in the news where everybody who ever shopped at Target's data got breached, right? So you want to protect against that. So what does it mean in health? You can silo the data into maybe different accounts. So if somebody actually does get in, maybe they social engineer, get the password out of somebody, they don't get to see all the data. They may see the data of the group that they're involved in if you have a clinical group, okay? So what we do is we silo it encrypted with cryptology. So the data, even if you log into, for instance, our cloud server, somebody got access to our AWS account, they wouldn't be able to see anything. Everything is encrypted by the group, okay? So they can take it, doesn't matter, right? They don't have the keys. Another way to do it is by accounts. You can have separate accounts for each group, right? So again, it's trying to protect against data leakage like that. Check the integrity. So when you're talking, like I said, a very common approach is to have maybe an analyzer or sensor talking to a mobile phone, talking to the cloud. Can you verify that where that data actually came from? Is that device what it's claiming to be, right? Or is there some sort of man-in-the-middle attack that can be happening? So we want to authenticate the source of the data, the target of the data, make sure that at all steps, it is authenticated. Use certificates for that, data signatures, code signatures, all the things that are listed in the cybersecurity guidance, for instance, applies to patient data and all data, protected data. A lot of what has to happen is continual monitoring. So when the data is up in the cloud, in a server, wherever it is, you have to have in place the systems to monitor against attacks, to monitor for vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities, everybody's using, when they build software, they're not building it from the ground up. They're using libraries, they're using open source libraries or whatever it is. But vulnerabilities, known vulnerabilities come out against that, and you have to be checking for it. So it's called the CVEs, the common vulnerability exposures. And you check here you check the NIST, the NIST database for those vulnerabilities. Okay, so you do, and you get this huge list of vulnerabilities in your product because your product is including a lot of libraries, it's including a lot of code, which you may or may not be using. So you have to go through those and filter it out. What actually applies? What do I need to fix? And then you have to actually fix it, right? Which is really, it's hard. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of expense, but it needs to be done. So if you have a vulnerability in the tools you're using, in the build environment you're using, things that go into your code, it needs to be addressed. When we first thought about getting certified for our cloud, we thought we were in pretty good shape, right? We had a lot of encryption, we had a lot of security, we had a lot of things, but we really had no idea about some of the processes and the checks and balances that are part of really ensuring the processes are compliant. So it was a great experience for us. We are SOC 2 Type 2 certified, and that really helped bring out some of the weaknesses we had in our system, because you have to have data recovery, you have to have the backups, you have to prove that you can recover those backups, you have to have all the processes in place to ensure the whole system is complete. So I do encourage anybody that is dealing with the data to get certified. It's like a great method to have other eyes on it that are experienced and know what they're looking for to look over your system. We looked at it initially as kind of a checkbox. We needed it for marketing, right? But then when we went through it, it's like, wow, this was really good. This really helped us. A great resource that we like to use is from OWASP. OWASP is the Open Web Application Security Project. They come out, their They're not medical device based. It's not, it's about general security. They come out with the top 10 list of security risks, for instance, on the web, and you can see them up here. The order changes over the years, so they'll have new ones, they'll change them around, but you can kind of see their top ones of where they're seeing failures. So it's very good to kind of look through it and understand, because they also give a lot of examples and how to fix these problems. One of the things that a lot of our clients don't realize is in the mobile app space. From OWASP, they give you what you need to do to protect your app. So you might think you create an app, it's secure, the OS is sandboxing it, you can't have one application affecting another, it's great. Unless it's on a jailbroken phone or a rooted phone. So there's ways that hackers can get around these, not even hackers. I mean, people can kind of break the security really easily on these phones. So the application, to be a secure application, has to check for these things. So it has to check to see if the device is rooted. And if so, say, sorry, I don't run on this device. Okay. Or if there has to be code tampering. One of the things that people don't realize, and it's not directly related to patient data, but it's important, is the code that's running on the mobile app is very visible to anybody who wants to see it. Okay. What does that mean? You can decompile it. You can get the source code out of the app very easily. So you want to what's called obfuscate that code. That's an extra step. That's an extra thing that you should do if you're writing an app in a secure environment. Of course, I mentioned data encryption. You need to encrypt the data that's being stored on the phone, especially the patient data. And let's talk about secure BLE, because this one comes up so much for us. There's so many instances now where people are making headless devices that use the mobile as the front end, which is great, right? It's a beautiful front end, it works well, no problem there. The problem is the method of pairing, the method of security, by default around that is very insecure. It's subject to what's called man-in-the-middle attacks. If you have a display on the device, the analyzer, the sensor, you can display a code and that get a secure connection going. But if you're headless, you either have to do something out of band or another approach. And what we'll usually do is do application level security. So the data going before it even gets to the BLE, which is Bluetooth low energy. For those who, sorry, when I use acronyms, I get so used to the industry, you forget that not everybody might know these things. But before it even gets there, it's already encrypted. And you do the key transfer and you do the safety measures to make sure that it's safe. And I bring that up just because we see it all the time. In our business, we do the consulting for cybersecurity, and just about every time I see that. They're not using a secure BLE transfer. It's encrypted, but it's not secure. Okay, the pairing process is subject to attack. So in conclusion, handling patient data is just like handling, it's what we call, well, it's like handling the basic security of the system. Patient data is like any data you need to secure. You need to encrypt it. You need to follow the correct cybersecurity hygiene. And the processes for risk management have to be in place. Continually monitor. Again, that's a big one because it's expensive and it's hard, but you need to do it. And be aware of your responsibilities under the privacy. So the FDA is not going to come after you over privacy. They don't care. That's not part of their safety. But the privacy laws are going to, right? So as a company, you need to cover yourself. And that's it. Questions?
Thank you very much, Francis. Yeah,
Sure.
please.
Okay, good.
I'll start with my first question. So you talked about the EU and the US, but what about the UAE? How is that?
The question is, You talked
Yeah.
about the US and EU. What about UAE, which is in Middle East?
And I wish I knew, but I don't. Yeah, I mean, privacy laws around the world you really have to hire an expert on different regions. We deal mostly with the EU and the US.
We follow the MDR for the EU, because I heard that.
I would kind of expect they wouldn't do their own thing. However, they might, I really can't speak for it.
The question was whether they follow the MDR in UAE.
Yeah, and
So-
some countries do follow the EU or the US, right?
So we do have Francis, I think, are you going to be on the panel tomorrow?
No, I'm
No.
actually going back.
Oh, but you can always send her the questions, or you can send the questions to us and we'll forward to her. So, thank you.
Go ahead.
Yes.
This might be too early to ask, but I know EU just came out with the proposed Cyber Resilience Act.
Okay.
What impact do you foresee that having in the cyber landscape, or if any significant changes?
There's so much overlap that at the end of the day, you have to understand that medical devices have been behind on general cybersecurity, right? The industry has been far beyond. The medical devices, for instance, authenticating users. If you have a defibrillator, you're going to take it off the wall. You don't want to put in a password, right? If you're the technician, you have to have a password if you're doing something on there. So what does it mean? I expect, I can't say this deterministically, that it's just making sure that everybody, again, is following this hygiene of cybersecurity. But we'll see. But like I mentioned, medical devices, I've been in it for 20 years, and I would say even 10 years ago, it really didn't cross our minds much. We didn't log into devices. We didn't authenticate users. So the landscape is continually changing and continually improving. Improvement might be subjective, but it's toughening, hardening.
Thank you so much,
thing.
Francis. I appreciate you giving this
Absolutely.
talk. I
Thank you for
learned a
having
lot
me.
because I
thank
thought
you.
when you
I hope-
encrypt
yeah.
it, it is secure, but it's not. So thank
Yes,
you very
there's
much.
A bit to it. Thank you.